Hey everyone. I know a lot of you are thinking about your options after the US election results came in, and maybe Canada is calling your name, feeling a bit unsure about what the future holds. Well, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into what it really takes to move to Canada from the US. We'll be separating fact from fiction about the process. To help us navigate this ever-changing landscape, we've got an expert with us who really knows the ins and outs of Canadian immigration law.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's definitely a hot topic these days. With everything going on, a lot of folks are curious about making the move. But it's important to remember that things have changed since 2016. Canada has always welcomed newcomers, for sure, but it's not quite as simple as it used to be.
Okay, so let's get right to it. Is Canada really as open as everyone says it is?
Not quite. The Canadian government has actually been tightening immigration rules lately. Part of the reason is the strain on social services. Healthcare is a big one.
So what does that actually mean for someone who is thinking about moving?
Well, even people who have lived in Canada for a long time are having a hard time finding a family doctor. Imagine moving to a new country and not even being able to find a doctor. That could be a deal breaker for a lot of people.
That's a huge thing to consider. So let's say permanent residency is a long shot right now. What about just testing the waters with a work permit?
That's a smart strategy. Work permits are a great way to get a feel for what it's like to live in Canada before committing to anything permanent. There are a few ways you could explore that, like CUSMA, which offers a streamlined process for some professions.
CUSMA, that's the new NAFTA, right? So doctors, lawyers, accountants, they'd have a pretty easy time.
Well, hold on. CUSMA does give you a 3-year work permit, but it's limited to very specific professions, mostly in traditional fields like engineers, nurses, teachers. And the most important thing is you need a job offer before you can even apply.
So no job offer, no dice. Got it. What about younger people who just want an adventure? I've heard of this program called International Experience Canada.
Ah, yes, that's a popular one, especially the working holiday stream. It's an open work permit that's good for 12 months, so it's perfect for exploring the country and getting some international experience.
That sounds amazing. But I bet those spots fill up pretty quickly.
You bet they do.
Yeah.
Last year, the quota for the working holiday visa was full within just 2 weeks. If you're thinking about 2025, now is the time to start applying.
Wow. So act fast. What about people in tech and engineering? It seems like Canada is always looking for talent in those areas.
Absolutely. That's where the global talent stream comes in. This option gives you a super fast processing time for LMIAs. That stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment, which is basically just proof that a Canadian employer needs to hire a foreign worker for a specific job. You can get an LMIA processed in just 2 weeks. That's really unheard of in other categories.
Okay, that sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any red flags people should watch out for?
There are always people out there trying to take advantage, especially when the demand is so high. Be really careful about anyone who promises guaranteed results, or anyone charging outrageous fees. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Good point. So we've talked about CUSMA for established professionals, International Experience Canada for adventurous types, and the Global Talent Stream for tech folks. What about people who are already working for a company that has a branch in Canada? Could they transfer within their company?
Intra-company transfers are possible, but the rules have gotten a lot stricter recently. You need to have specialized knowledge or be in a senior management position, and you have to prove that the transfer is absolutely necessary. You can't just use it as a loophole to get around regular immigration processes. Officers are really scrutinizing these applications very carefully.
So no sneaking in through the back door. What about studying in Canada? Is that a viable way to stay in the country long term?
It's an option, but it's gotten a lot tougher and more expensive. Tuition fees are really high, and graduating doesn't automatically guarantee you permanent residency.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about permanent residency. We know it's a difficult process, but what are the main options?
The main route is express entry. It's a point-based system. Canadian work experience and language skills are really important. If you're already living in Canada, the Canadian experience class is a good option.
But what about someone who has no Canadian experience? Realistically, what are their chances?
Honestly, it's tough. You're going up against a pool of highly qualified people. A lot of them already have Canadian education and work experience. It all comes down to something called the Comprehensive Ranking System, or CRS for short. It awards points based on things like your age, education, language proficiency, and you guessed it, Canadian work experience.
So unless you speak French fluently, Which gives you bonus points. Yeah.
Exactly. Being fluent in French can really boost your score and open up a lot more opportunities.
Got it. I've also heard about these provincial nominee programs. Were those still an option?
They are, but the situation has changed. Nomination allocations were recently cut in half, so it's even more competitive. You need a strong connection to a specific province, like a job offer, family ties, or previous experience living there. For example, if you're a skilled tradesperson, provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan are really looking for people with those skills.
So it's all about having a targeted approach. Now, this next one might apply to some of our listeners. What about spousal sponsorship?
Yes, that's a pretty common path for U.S. citizens who are married to or in a common law relationship with a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. But you have to be able to prove that your relationship is genuine and that you really intend to live in Canada together. It's not just a shortcut to get permanent residency.
I actually know a couple who almost got rejected because they didn't have enough proof. They had a great love story, but their paperwork wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, that happens more often than you'd think. Immigration officers want to see concrete evidence, like plans for housing, job prospects, community involvement, that kind of thing.
So even if you're madly in love, you have to prove it on paper. Now, what if you do get permanent residency through spousal sponsorship, but then something changes and you have to live outside of Canada for a while? Is that allowed?
That's where it gets interesting. There's something called the ordinarily resident rule that gives you some flexibility. As long as you maintain strong ties to Canada and your spouse stays here, you can spend some time abroad without risking your permanent resident status.
Wow, that's a relief. I had no idea about that rule. So it's not an all or nothing situation then.
Exactly. But as with everything we've talked about today, it's really important to talk to a qualified immigration professional. They can help you understand the specifics of your own situation.
Okay, last one I'm curious about. The digital nomad visa. Is that a real thing? And is it an option for Americans?
It's more of a trendy term than an actual visa category. It's basically a visitor visa that gives you more flexibility to work remotely. You can come to Canada, enjoy the lifestyle, and keep working for your U.S. employer.
That sounds pretty appealing. But can you use it to stay in Canada for the long term?
Not necessarily. Immigration officers are looking very closely at people's intentions. If it seems like you're using the digital nomad visa as a backdoor to permanent residency, you could be denied entry.
So be upfront about your plans. Don't try to game the system.
Exactly. Transparency is key. Make sure you meet all the requirements for a visitor visa and be clear about why you want to work remotely from Canada.
This has been so helpful. Thanks for breaking all that down for us. For our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed, what are the most important things to remember?
The biggest one is that moving to Canada is possible, but it takes planning, realistic expectations, and expert guidance. Don't rely on rumors you see on social media. Do your research, understand the rules, and watch out for scams.
That's where rstm.com comes in. Their immigration section has a ton of reliable information, and you can connect with trusted immigration professionals there.
Absolutely. If you're serious about making the move, a personalized consultation is a must. A qualified professional can help you figure out if you're eligible and walk you through the process.
It's like anything else in life, right? You wouldn't perform surgery on yourself. Immigration is just as complex, and you need expert help. Speaking of expert help, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to remind our listeners that the best way to get personalized advice and answers to your specific questions is to connect with the immigration professionals at rstm.com. They offer consultations that can really help you figure out the best options for your situation.
Don't try to do this alone. A good immigration professional is worth their weight in gold. They can save you a lot of time, money, and stress in the long run.
Couldn't agree more. We'll pause here for now, but when we come back in part 2, we'll dig even deeper into the nuances of Canadian immigration. We'll talk about potential pitfalls to avoid and the steps you can start taking right now to plan your future. Stay tuned.